So I recently dropped a new brush back that's all about digital ink washes. If you're into comic or manga-style illustration, this is a technique that's a great way to add mood, texture, and atmosphere to your line work, kind of like adding a cinematic filter to your art. After releasing the pack, I realized there aren't many videos breaking down how to actually use ink washes digitally. So I figured, let's dive into it together. I'll walk you through my process while I work on this piece. So let's go. Alright, for today's demo, we're going to be using this illustration that I put together. It's a drawing of Psylocke from X-Men. And just to quickly go over how I've set up the document, I have let's turn this off. I have my sketching layer, at which point I did a quick outline with some inks using my inking brush pack. And then I went over that on a new layer with some textures with some other inking brushes that I've created. So together, this is what we've got. And this gives us a really good place to start with our ink wash. Now, what's important to understand with ink washes is to really think about where you want to apply ink wash and what do you want to get out of the ink wash. So for this illustration, I've determined that I want my light source from the top right corner. You see this arrow pointing down, and I've outlined in roughly where I want my darker shadows to hit on this illustration. And I'm going to be using my ink wash to sort of set the mood and add some tone and add some depth. So first thing I'm going to do is going to create a new layer, jump over to my brushes, go into my created brush sets, and then I'll grab my ink wash. And I'm going to make this fairly large because I'm going to do a big base layer of ink wash that I'm going to apply to everything. And I'm going to use a medium tone. Why medium? Well, first of all, we're doing a grayscale monochrome illustration. But why directly down the middle? This is something to consider when you're doing your illustration. Is if I were to start with something lighter, for example, that means I don't really have that much room to go to brighten the image up or create lighter spots. I only have one direction to work in, really. If I start in the middle, it gives me two directions to work with. I can work a little bit darker, or I can work a little bit lighter. So with that in mind, I'm going to apply. Now, that mindset that I just talked about, that only applies to digital ink wash. Traditional ink wash works very differently. So that's why I want to make this video, because doing ink washes digitally is very different. Now you can see as I'm applying my ink wash, it is bleeding out very nicely, which is something I want. Creates a nice naturalistic effect. And you also see a paper texture applied to the brush, which is great. Also adds that naturalistic effect. Now I can keep going back and forth because this is a pressure sensitivity brush. It's not going to go that full 50% gray that I selected. It's going to go a little bit lighter, but I'm going to keep applying it, going back and forth just to add just a little bit more tone to this illustration. And then once I lift my brush, what's going to happen is, as you see, if I'm moving my brush across the illustration, it's blending my brush strokes nicely, because right now the way Infinite Painter works, it's considering this brush as wet. Right now I'm applying a wet brush on top of a wet canvas. The moment I lift my brush up, it's going to consider everything that I just done right now dry. So what that means is, let's decrease my brush size and go to about 50. I haven't changed my colors or the hue that I'm working in. If I just zoom in and then apply that tone, you can see the brush starts to behave differently. Because now the brush is behaving as if I was applying my wet brush on top of a dried ink wash. And that's what's going to create sort of that more separation between the two colors. And that's fine. This is a little too stark for me right now. I like to build up slowly, personally. But if you're someone who likes to work really heavy, then you don't need to make any adjustments at this point. But for me personally, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit undo. I'm just going to simply play with the flow settings and the opacity settings of the brush. Everything was at 100% before. And now you can see it gives me a little bit more wiggle room to play with how much ink wash I'm being applied to the page. So think of the flow and the opacity in this case, as if you're coming from a traditional ink washing sort of background, think of it as how much you're diluting your brush by applying more water or less water, or adding more inks to your palette. This is doing the opacity is one way of achieving the same effect. You can also go ahead into the color palette and select like a darker gray or a darker color if you're working with colors. So here, again, you want to be mindful of what it is you want to accomplish with your ink wash. For me, the ink wash is mostly going to be affecting the skin tones. For the costumes and and for the props for the illustration, I want to leave the inks, the textures that I've used in the inks, to do most of the work there. That's very purposeful in the way I've constructed this illustration. So I recommend that you guys experiment with different ways of you using ink washes and how you want to leverage that in your illustration. For me here, I wanted to use my inks and my brushes to give that leathery, shiny look to the costume and to give that sort of dull, matted look to the sword. But for the skin tone, I wanted something softer, something that had a more of a naturalistic look. So that's why I'm going to be relying on the ink washes themselves to do that for the skin tones. So I'm just going to keep applying more of the ink wash over the illustration, and this is just me doing sort of a general pass at what the shading is going to be for this illustration. It's not, sorry, I just keep tapping the home button here. I have to hide that menu. Yeah, I've just been applying sort of the general shading. They're not being super specific or super detailed on it just yet, just because I want to lay everything out so I have a really good base tone to work with before I start polishing this and smoothing it out. So the great thing about Infinite Painter is that all the brushes that you create, or the brushes available in the library, are available in your brushes, in your erasers, but also in your blending tool. So with my blending tool, I'm going to go ahead and make sure I have my fine point diluted selected. And what this is going to do is allow me to soften this, smooth this out as if I was applying water to my canvas, but without losing any of that brushy, watery, paper-like texture to my brush strokes. So it won't look overly smooth. It'll still have a little bit of that texture, a little bit sense of those brush strokes, but at the same time, I'm smoothing things out so it doesn't look too splotchy or too out there. Now, you can experiment with this, and I definitely encourage you to find sort of the right level for you. Some looks and some illustrations will want to retain sort of the splotchiness or sort of that raw look of adding water to paper, which is what the ink wash brush gives you. And then you want to go on the other side of that. You want really smooth gradations. Yeah, maybe you don't want to see as much texture, paper texture, or brush strokes. So you can definitely play around with that with the smudge tool and see where your comfort level is with that. But I recommend just laying down your base tones like I just did with the ink wash, and then experimenting with the diluted fine point brush to experiment with like how much smudging or blending you want to apply to your illustration and how much of the raw brush strokes you want to leave intact. Okay, so now I have sort of the basic shading. The shapes are starting to be a little bit more defined. I want to go in there and just add some more detail. Again, this is one of the benefits of working digitally versus traditionally. Traditionally, you'd have to rely on using really fine point brushes, and there's going to be like a ceiling or a limit of what you can do based off your skill set or your practice using those finer points. With digitally, you can zoom in, grab your brushes, and then start working away. So here I'm going to switch from the ink wash brush to the fine point wet. This is one of the brushes I really like. It's very versatile. So here, without changing, again, I haven't changed the tone with this brush just yet. I'm still using the same 50% gray. And let's go ahead and apply that to this illustration, just adding some finer details in the shape definition. This here looks like I missed a lot of this gear, so I want to define that more. I want to add a little bit of a rim light behind her. So I don't want to go all the way to the edge, but I do want to sort of do the darkest dark right before I hit that rim light. That a little bit more. So you can see with the fine wet, it allows you to have sort of that brushy or wet brush effect that you have with the ink wash, but it's a little bit more refined, a little bit more control. It's not bleeding quite as much. And the brush shape allows you to be a little bit more intentional and more directed with it versus what you can do with the ink wash. Ink wash very much is just big, bold wash over your illustration. That's very much what it's intended for. And this brush I think is really fantastic for going in there, defining those details and sort of slowly adding polish and bringing it more to life. Okay, so this is looking pretty good, but there's one more brush I want to grab and apply to this illustration. So I'm going to go over to my brushes and I'm going to select dry marker. This is a brush that I was interested in including in just because I know there's a lot of artists out there that use mixed media in their illustrations, and I think it gives a great look, great effect. So I've grabbed this dry marker brush and I've dropped it from 50% gray down to sort of I guess 70%, I guess is fair. And then I'm going to start applying that. So you can see this brush has a very nice matted texture to it that you can apply to your illustration. So I'm just going to add that to her costume area just so that I can bring a better focus into sort of highlighted spots. And make it feel more in tone with the ink wash that I've just applied to the rest of the illustration. And one thing that you've noticed is that I'm not too worried about going outside the edges. Ink wash by its nature is going to bleed, and if you're doing something super refined, what you can do is you can grab your eraser tool and go ahead and erase it, or grab your lasso tool using your inking layer to select around the silhouette of your illustration, and then go ahead and making those adjustments there. But for this illustration, I'm actually more than okay with the messiness of it. I kind of want to encourage it and show it off in this illustration, just because I'm trying for that traditional, messy, not quite perfect comic book look here. So that's welcomed in this illustration, but that's again up to you on what type of illustration that you're looking to create. The ink wash brushes can definitely support a wide variety of looks and feels. And it's really just up to your imagination and the techniques that you apply to it to achieve the different looks that you're going for. Okay, so this is looking good. I can probably refine this further by smudging certain things out, blending certain areas, and I can probably spend endless amount of times of refining, but I don't want to bore you guys. So what I'm going to do is just skip ahead a little bit, and I'm going to apply something that I usually reserve to the end of the illustration. So I'm going to go to my top inking layer. I'm going to create a new layer on top of that. I'm going to grab my inking brushes. So you can use, if you're using sort of the default settings, you can use the manga brushes, pretty good for this. Some of the other pens are pretty good for this, or you can experiment with some of the other brushes. I like the custom brushes I've created. In here, we're going to use 100% white. And we're going to go ahead and apply some highlights to the illustration. I'm going to increase my brush size here. And we'll add some highlights here. Add it to the lips. So as you see, I'm obviously speed running this illustration. Otherwise, I would add more details to the face and whatnot. But here we can definitely use these brushes to add some more depth and highlights to the illustration. Create some separation for the planes. Here. Then yeah, just experiment, see what works. Because you're working on a separate layer, you can erase things, refine things, experiment with how you want the lighting to look ultimately. I like for like the hair to add some, like if there was like some strands of hair out of place, and because we're working with like a gray tone underneath this, you can see those strands sort of play out like it was being caught in the light. That's always a great effect. Add some verisimilitude to your illustrations. Check your materials, see which materials would have sort of more specular highlights attached to it versus others. And then yeah, just keep playing, keep experimenting, and I hope you guys enjoy this demo, and hope that you guys found it very useful. And yeah, then if you keep refining using some of those techniques I just talked about and keep polishing, you're definitely going to achieve a very traditional, very polished, very cinematic, very atmospheric look for your illustration. And that's how I use digital ink washes to bring more depth and more drama to my illustrations. What do you think? Something you'd try in your own work? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you're curious about the brush pack that I used, the link is in the description. Thanks for watching, and as always, keep drawing.